Welcome back to the Betsperts Golf DFS Show here at none other than BetspertsGolf.com. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today by a good friend in life who's back on the show for the first time in a couple of weeks since he had the infamous Patrick Reed call whenever Reed back in the day was only 6,900. I'm young enough to remember that. None other than PGA Splits 101 himself, Ron Klos. Ron, how's everything going post-Memorial Tournament for you?
Yeah, doing well. I think we're going to be talking about Patrick Reed a little more this week. Billy Ho kind of, that Saturday, he just kind of took that Memorial by force. And, there's just so much golf news breaking. It's just my head's kind of spinning. It's kind of a circus out there with all the live stuff. And obviously we have the RBC Canadian, finally returning back to Canada after, a couple-year break. And, really excited for Tyler to be on today, from Canada. And so looking forward to his insight in yours too, John, as usual.
And you mentioned it. We can't be a trio without a third. So we're going to the roots of Canada and getting none other than contributor at Run Pure Sports, who is host to some of my other friends, Big T, JSU, none other than Canada's own Tyler Tamboline. Tyler, it is an honor to have you on the show as our first-time guest.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. It's fitting, like you said, RBC Canadian Open, got to bring a Canadian on. So happy to be here. Happy to chop it up with you guys. Been a big fan. Follow all of Ron's stuff, especially all season. I've been talking about just going through the stuff he puts out there as well. So appreciate it there and excited to get into it with you guys for sure.
I'm excited about the conversation to come about today because we are headed to St. George's Country Club just outside Toronto. And this field not only has numerous scoring opportunities with 5 par 3s and 3 par 5s, but it's also top heavy and hosting number one world player Scotty Scheffler, defending Canadian Open champion Rory McIlroy, PGA champion Justin Thomas, Players champion and Memorial Tournament favorite until he blew up in that final round, and Cam Smith and Sam Burns, this is going to be his first start since taking down Scheffler in the Charles Schwab playoff a few weeks back. And Ron, with this course playing roughly 7,000 total yards, a shorter one, I don't think we need to focus on distance so much, but I would love to get your thoughts on the categories that you are prioritizing most and you think matter the most here at the RBC Canadian Open.
Yeah, so definitely this is kind of more of a precision type course. I think this may be, with a lot of DFS players kind of jumping on, the whole ownership angle. And I think it's a great chance to be different. One thing I noticed just looking at the photos of the course, satellite, even some videos, there's not a lot of dog legs. The fairways do meander a little bit, but it is tree lined. But I think there is a chance here to maybe play the distance angle a little bit. I know going back to 2019, different course, but Hamilton Golf and Country Club is kind of a comp course to St. George's this week. And so, Rory kind of overpowered that course. And so I think maybe, taking a different angle at that, actually taking some guys who are long off the tee, but total driving kind of takes that, fairways gain plus driving distance. So I'm going to be looking at that. It's clearly a shot maker's course. The Brendan Todds of the world who we'll get into, kind of perfect fit for those guys. We've got some long rough this week. Reports are, around 3.5 inches, and they've gotten a lot of rain. And, Tyler can speak to that probably a little as well. But, that rough, when it gets really wet, even gets more difficult. We have the second smallest greens on tour, only 4,000 square feet. So kind of good drives gained is a stat I love to use at courses like this where, you have some penal rough. And, again, that stat kind of measures who can get the ball to the green, even if they hit a bad shot off the tee. And so that is a stat I'm really focusing on. Obviously, we're looking for guys with an elite short game, scramblers. And so just a lot of different angles to look at this week. But overall, just kind of those tee to green guys is who I'll be looking for this week.
Any thoughts to extend on that, Tyler? Anything that you in particular will be looking for when building lineups this week?
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of focus on, some of the stuff that Ron talked about there. But one thing that stands out, you both mentioned, it's a shorter course on paper, right? People see that total yardage number, they immediately go to that. But with these guys clubbing down in some cases off the tee, with there being 5 par 3s where 4 of them are over 200 yards, with there being 3 par 5s where 2 of them are reachable, like we actually have probably a lot more longer irons than you think going to be coming from out there. So I like Ron's take on the total tee to green game, that approach. We know there's a lot of bunkers around these greens. So I think the sand play is actually something to consider here. Everyone talks about these dope greens and things like that, where you can just get pushed off them. And that's where you're going to need that complete game and that around the green. And then, like you said, with weather, I'm looking at the same thing you are. I feel it. I hear you. Like the rain, that to me, like everyone thinks softer conditions right out of the gate. Yes, there will be some. We saw it last week at the Memorial as guys like Cam Young came out hot out of the gate, but you can't get hung up on that. We saw how Cam Young finished and some of the other guys that started strong. It doesn't mean everything, but I think the one thing it does mean is, to Ron's point there, the rough will be a little bit thicker, makes it that much more tough. You have to keep it in the fairway to be able to set yourself up. So while it won't compare to all these courses, some things like an RBC Heritage, I don't think it's nearly the same course. What I like about that comp, though, would be where you need to set yourself up proper off the tee to be able to get the second shot that you want. And I think that's what we see a lot at a lot of these places around here. Valspar has been brought up for that reason as well. So certainly looking at some of that. And then to your point, just the field strength, it's so top heavy here. So there's going to be some awkwardness. The last thing to that I would just add is with the value plays. I think there's 93 value play, or like guys 6,900 or less based on the ads DK sent out today of getting added to the field. And honestly, there's not very many of them that seem playable. So be interesting to get your guys' takes when we get down there. But for me, there's not too many. So roster construction will be one of the biggest factors going into this tournament for me.
The issue also, as we move into the elite tier and talk about the highest price golfers on DraftKings, the issue also is that when you initially start building lineups, you will soon discover that the DraftKings algorithm made pricing as tight as possible. Shane Lowry, we recall, egregiously underpriced at $9K last week, blew up to 10-1 because he was one of last week's highest priced golfers in being egregiously priced. Harold Varner went from 7,800 to 9,700. Adam Hadwin, when I was initially building, like I went to auto click him, knowing in past weeks he hadn't reached 7K, and I thought he was a good course fit as a value. He's all the way up to 9,300 this week. And not to mention Keith Mitchell, Patrick Reed, Corey Connors, who like is actually just now catching up to where he should be at 9,600. So I don't mind that so much. But the point is, because of that, the top tier, then, these guys are about to talk about, and Scotty Scheffler 11-1 yet again, leading the way. JT 10-9, Rory McIlroy 10-5, Cam Smith above 10K as well, Shane Lowry, Sam Burns. Like, the point is now, those guys, in my opinion, are now underpriced and likely undervalued for having significantly better odds of an outright win than any of the other individuals at like the high nines. And so I actually do like getting at least one of these individuals, whether it be Scheffler or Cam. Those are my two favorites. I'll kick it off to you, Ron, to let you start on where you're beginning here. But overall, like, yeah, I want to make sure I have one of these guys thinking that they're still going to actually be under rostered compared to what they should be, in my opinion.
Yeah, these weeks are always tricky for me when you have such a top heavy field. Some of these prices, as we've had some of these recently, they're just tough to swallow. You can make a strong case for each one of these upper tier guys. I think when you look at, between Scheffler, Thomas, McIlroy, Smith, and Burns, like each of those, well, at least other than McIlroy, 4 of them have won in the past 3 months. So these guys are winning tournaments. And so it's really hard to kind of narrow that top tier down. The thing for me also is there's just not much of a middle tier this week. We're so used to, when we get into the, 9 and 8K range, seeing guys with win equity, and I just don't see that this week. And so it's almost going back to Tyler's point, if you want to play, 2 of these upper tier guys or even one, when you get into that 7K range, there's not a lot that piques my interest this week. And so that's kind of what I'm still kind of dealing with here. If I'm looking at the top, though, I love Scheffler. When we look at his last 4 months, he's got 5 top 7s. His consistency has pretty much been amazing. Even in his bad weeks, you look at a miscut at the PGA, 55th at the Players. Of course, there was some weather there, but he hasn't played poorly, even when he's, kind of struggled when you look at the leaderboard. And then JT, I like to kind of, and I know there's not much sample size, but I like to go back and look at when players played the week before a major. And he's only played 5 events going back to 2016. And he has gained 2.3 strokes per round playing the week before a major with 3 top 10s and 2 wins. So, I love JT this week. I'm sure we'll get into Rory here, but, Rory, I just don't know what to do with him sometimes. He's a guy who's, you look at the model, he's, I think, finished second in my model for the week. Lowry, just one more I'll mention here. I could just skip this whole top and just go right down to Shane Lowry and just start my lineups with him. He was runner up here at the Hamilton course in 2019. He's really playing quality golf, but he has no wins to show for it. So, that's kind of how I'm approaching it. I am fading Smith and Burns for sure. But it's a really interesting decision making here with this top tier.
And that's initially why I struggled, Tyler, as Ron mentioned, because I did start with two of these guys thinking they're going to be undervalued and pricing is so tight that then everyone's going to naturally start building in the high 9Ks, mid 9Ks, and have their core, like last week, built from that range. The issue is, as you said at the beginning of the show, you can't find like 3 or 4 values to depend on. Like I started reaching then for Steven Yeager and Vaughn Taylor, and I'm like, do I really trust these guys in single entries? And so I'm curious, like, is this the range where you're starting to build your lineups? Do you have an argument for or against any of these top individuals before we get down to like the 9Ks where we think everyone will probably start their core?
Yeah, you nailed it with that last part, especially. I think the 9K, it's going to be popular no matter what. There's plenty of guys in there. I posted a tweet out today just to get a feel. Like I said, I think people will still go back to Fitzpatrick. I think people won't like the price on Varner, but the next 6 guys in there, it's like everyone could make a case for them. So and again, or against them, like people say, don't play Hadwin because of the price increase, but that's not actually deterring people from what I'm seeing. People are still interested in Hadwin. They still think he fits. They've bet him at 45, 50, 60 to 1, whatever those numbers are. Typically that leaks over. But going back to your original question back at the top, I think this is one of those weeks you just have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And what I mean by that is, like you said, the pricing's increased on all the guys up to about 9,700 with Varner. But after that, you could kind of argue they're underpriced. Like that, it's an $1,100 increase for Lowry from last week, but the field strength went way down in my, just looking at it. So I actually don't think it's that bad. And to Ron's point there, you could definitely start a lineup with Lowry or Smith. He's not as high on Smith, but with Lowry, you could start there and call that the savings or else go up top. The one guy that I'm pretty sure I'm off here, just looking at everything right now, is Rory McIlroy. Again, you can't make an argument against him, really. My only thing I would say is a lot of what people are seeing with the recent form, with the numbers, the strong finishes in majors, all of that, you can't forget or put aside that a lot of those are sort of backdoor, back-end finishes that slip in to something that looks a little bit better on paper versus a consistency level of like a JT or especially with Scheffler, where it just gets continuously overlooked. Like, he can't win again. He can't do it again. How many times can you say that until it's finally correct? I mean, obviously not every week he comes out and does it, but been a pretty good season for that guy. So I see Scheffler, JT, Smith, Lowry, sort of the 4 guys I like up top. And I don't think you have to play 2 of them together. If I was to play 2 of them together to get unique, it would probably actually be Smith and Lowry, because the pricing is just that tight, John, to what you mentioned earlier, that I'd want that little bit of savings. This is a week for sure where a little bit goes a long way. So I've got no problem with something like that versus trying to pair Scotty, JT, and you almost need a runaway finish from those 2 on top of nailing the 4 value plays that you'd have to get right. It's a lot tougher to make that happen as far as probabilities go. So I like starting one of these guys up top, but if I was to go 2, it would be Smith and Lowry.
Ron, can you sell me or tell me why you're against Cam Smith? Because in my opinion, he's the second best option in this range behind Scheffler. Scheffler not only for being like the best option overall, but also just in the fact that game theory wise, I also think it being 11-2 or 11-1 yet again, like a couple weeks ago, he's going to go overlooked compared to like what he should be rostered. But what are the flaws in Cam Smith for this course?
Yeah, and it's just kind of me getting picky here,
And it's relative, obviously, to like the other best golfers in the world. I understand. Yeah.
And I guess from an ownership perspective, I have him at around 11% right now. For me, it was just kind of the off the tee game. I know everyone talks about that. Over the last 24 rounds, I have him as 60th off the tee. He does have that tendency to spray the ball, and with the rough this week with the bunkers. I think that's kind of the one weakness out of those top tier that kind of stuck out to me the most. So that's just kind of the angle I'm going at. Now, I've done this before with him, and he's come and he's won the next week. So, he could obviously win very easily this week. But that's kind of my argument that I would go with him as the off the tee game.
Totally fair. Moving on to the 9K range, though, I do think, in my opinion, the conversation should start with Matthew Fitzpatrick, who did miss the cut last week. So we're getting good recency bias for game theory purposes on him. But also he missed the cut solely for putting, because his putting was so piss poor that he was never going to make it to Saturday with that performance. But in approach shots, gained 1.2 strokes. Off the tee, gained 1.3 strokes. And was had a accuracy rate hitting fairways 10% higher than the field average. So literally everything we look for in course fit and how to play this course, he did well, minus his putting, which we know is volatile. And so that's why I don't mind going right back to Fitzpatrick at 9.9. But Tyler, where does it start for you in the 9K range?
Yeah, one thing I'll say on him, just it's a football analogy, but I know a lot, like as far as NFL DFS goes, I know a lot of people watching this probably still at least dabble in it, but I call it the Will Fuller effect. And it was like a season or two ago, I forget what it was. Anyway, everyone played him until week 5 when he finally broke the slate. They just didn't care that he was not coming through. Air yards was a thing, right? So we still had those for us. And I can relate that here. The only stat, to your point, John, with Fitzpatrick was the putting. And that miscut means, I think these days, especially, that means nothing to people. Yeah. I could actually still see him pushing 15 to 20%, no problem here. Maybe even more in the higher stakes where people seem to be a little bit more forgiving. And that leaves some of the uncomfortability, like I mentioned earlier, with guys below him, like Varner. Hatton will get some. He's getting bet, but will he get 12 to 15 versus 18 to 20? I can see that. Hadwin, for me, I struggle with because, like I said, I think people are still going there, and that price is quite a bit of an increase. Finau is always super popular. So the guys that stand out for me would be like Varner, Hatton, Munoz. And then Connors, I think I'll play regardless of ownership because he will be popular here, but he's the guy that I expect to see it from. If we finally can get a Canadian to ship this thing, I think it's going to be Corey Connors is our guy that we're going to have go do it for us. And I think it's also a guy that wants to go and do it. Of course, all these guys want to win. I'm just talking about what he's capable of with the effort mixed together of how much it means to him. Maybe it's the opposite and ends up being too much pressure, but I'm okay with taking that risk and put my money there to find out because I think Connors is more than capable. We know what his game sets up like. Pretty much perfect for a course like this. So we have to see how it shakes out. But Varner is the one I think most won't go to. Doesn't have a lot of win equity, but that's where I'm saying is when there's not a lot of value down below, both in this range and the 8K range, which is especially gross when we get there, you're going to have to take some chances if you want to have some builds that you think can find that upside. And people say, oh, that never works. You can go back to last week, a $7,900 Billy Horschel with 5 8K guys. I do not expect that again because the 8K range is completely different this week. I'm just saying these things can end up happening, and it would make perfect sense at a little bit easier course with a little less strength of field that we could find some of these guys pop through and get a win. So I got no problem getting a little bit uncomfortable in the 9 and 8K range here.
And as I discussed with Connors earlier, I just think finally the price has caught up to where he should be. Has not lost total strokes gain. So has gained strokes in every tournament total so far this year, except for, or since February, since the PGA Championship. But we all know that's because he drew the wrong tee time wave that was impacted the most by weather. So I ignored that one altogether, was right back at it with 2.2 strokes gain and approach last week. And so definitely a player I want to get back on. Also, you mentioned the Will Fuller effect for the analogy for football. In golf, we just call it the Aaron Wise effect, even though it finally became profitable last week for Ryan Noonan in particular. But Ron, for you, 9K range, let's say you're starting your core here. Where are you beginning with? Who are you starting to stack up from this spot?
I think Fitzpatrick and Connors are two guys who are probably going to be chalky eventually, and I think we could call those two guys good chalk this week. Fitzpatrick is just, he's first in total driving. When we get into, around the green play, obviously he's 5th in sand saves, which Tyler said earlier. I think that's actually going to play a big role this week, with 104 bunkers, 3rd in scrambling. He's 6th in good drives. So he's someone who, I think is a really good fit here. And if the course does play tougher, obviously he tends to play really well the tougher the conditions get. So, if we're looking at a, 10, 12 under final score here, I think, that's really going to play to his advantage. Corey Connors, I read some reports that he's been playing St. George, been practicing there recently. 6 top 25s his last 9 events. Last week at the Memorial, he gained 8 strokes on approach. So, those irons are looking sharp. Obviously, everybody talks about his short game, his putting. So if he can just have one of those weeks where he pops with the putter, I think he's in a really good position here. And, people I've heard, Canadian hasn't won here since I think it's 1954. So some crazy number, I don't really buy into that stuff, but, I think he's a really good play. And one more guy who people are kind of starting to talk more about here. And even myself, just digging into the numbers with Tyrrell Hatton, outside of a bad week at Augusta, he's gaining strokes in every single event. And, kind of with Cam Smith, people kind of get on him for his off the tee game, kind of gets a little wild at times, but, he's gained two events in a row off the tee. He was 13th in the PGA. and he gained 4.2 strokes ball striking there. And kind of going back to Tyler's point, where we have, I think, the par threes this week, 4 of them are over 200 plus yards. Yeah. That's one of his strengths. He's the best iron player in this field from over 200 yards. So, he's another guy who, it looks like ownership is creeping up on him a bit as well. But those would be my top 3 in this 9K range.
Even though it's creeping up, though, I can't imagine he gets too high since he's sandwiched right there in between Connors, Finau, who we know is popular, and Hadwin. Like, it's actually kind of the perfect spot for Hatton. I didn't even think about it till you mentioned it. So it actually makes for a terrific, like, hopefully 10 to 12% option, if not lower, especially in single entry tournaments. I want to make you plant your flag, though, before we move on, Tyler. Do you have, like, because you mentioned like 4 to 6 players, do you have like 1 or 2 players in particular you'll be overweight on, understanding that we are recording this on Tuesday afternoon and things can change?
Yeah, Hatton for sure, and Varner, because for Varner, it's simple. It looks bad on paper, but that's just, I played this game way too long to go on that route. Like, it's just at the end of the day, I think he's still fine. He's not as good as, like you said, like Fitzpatrick and Connors look like the better chalk, but in large field tournaments where you need to be perfect to take these things down, something like that big $20, I'm okay with taking the stand on Varner. I think someone like Fitzpatrick is good if you're playing higher stakes, higher dollars, smaller field where he's going to make the cut, or I would suspect he doesn't do what he does last week and ends up doing that for you. But if he just makes the cut and then falls back to 20th or 30th, that can work when you only have to beat 1,000 people if you still have a 6 of 6 and everything goes with it correctly. But it's not going to do the job in these large field tournaments. You're going to have to get uncomfortable there. And I think Varner is that guy for me. Hatton, like you said, perfect squeeze play. 2 above in Fitzpatrick and Connors, 2 below in Finau and Hadwin. And if I had to pick one last one for you, the good chalk Connors, look, at 5 par 3s and we think he plays 4 rounds for 20 holes. His other partner in crime there, Hadwin, had a hole-in-one last week. He almost did, was 23 inches. It seems like Connors always has a hole-in-one. So maybe bet the Connors hole-in-one if you want to do something and not play him in DFS. It seems live with 20 shots over the weekend here. It's just the extra thought there.
And to your point on Varner, like, I also saw that salary and was like, okay, that's bad. But also, like, it may work into game theory wise that's the way all the sharps are thinking. Like, okay, salary increase, thus I don't play him, when everything really does match up with this course. And really, a couple of weeks ago at Charles Schwab, only like a triple bogey in the final round ruined him. Otherwise, he was competing to win overall. So I do actually, I haven't come to, like, I don't know exactly where I sit just yet, but I definitely don't mind Varner whatsoever. Ron, it only seems fair to kick off like this 8K, middle 7K range with you with Patrick Reed, because as you mentioned earlier, we were going to end up talking about him anyhow.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to get different in this range, just kind of starting with at 9K with Keith Mitchell, actually. He's excellent off the tee, and if we're taking a more of a distance angle, trying to be contrarian, he's a guy who's 14th in driving distance. Surprisingly, looking into the numbers, he's actually top 35 on tour for sand saves, for scrambling. He's really good on these longer par 3s, the longer par 4s, streaky putter. So he's a guy, kind of in good form, 34th at the PGA, 18th last week at the Memorial. So, I think he's a guy that I'm going to be looking at as well. And yes, Patrick Reed, weaker field. I know one thing I like to do is when we have courses like this with really small greens, 4,000 square feet, I'll go and I'll take kind of a group of courses. And what I did is I took all the courses under 5,000 square feet. And when you look at those courses, he, over the last 3 years, he's second in the entire field in strokes gained total on those courses with small greens. And so kind of what that tells me is, look, everyone's going to miss greens this week, okay, with the longer rough, with the small greens. So when everybody's missing greens, he is still picking up strokes. And most of that is his around the green play, his scrambling, his sand saves. So he's a guy that, I think, especially like with Fitzpatrick, if we get kind of a tougher condition type course this week, I love Patrick Reed this week. Justin Rose is another guy who, that price tag, considering some of his recent results, 8,800 is really tough to take in, but he's kind of been a little boomer bust lately. And I think one thing I like to do here is just to kind of go for guys with high upside. And I think Rose gives some upside, even at that price. He was 13th at the PGA. He gained over 5 strokes on approach. And so, I think he's a good fit this week as well. And his ownership appears like it's pretty low right now.
Yeah.
And so those are kind of the 3 guys, Mitchell, Reed, and Rose, that I'm really looking close at here.
I've had a hard time reading this range, Tyler, and I would think right now Thigala is definitely coming in hot. Maybe CT Pan is like a option that I think should be overlooked, but is not because everyone's catching on. What about you in the 8K range? Where do you stand?
Yeah, you said that one perfectly. That was my line I used last night. I said he's the very early week sneaky guy that's not actually
Yeah.
sneaky. And by the end of the week, you'll see where his ownership lies. Look, it's for good reason. The guy definitely looks good on paper. You look at all his numbers across the board, they're very solid. I would say only the par fives really rule him out, but a guy that hits fairways and greens, it might not really rule him out because he can set himself up for that great third shot in where he also excels. So I understand why he might be picking up steam. A couple of the guys, though, the other guy that stood out for higher ownership, at least, was Johnny Vegas. I think it's just the fact that some of the stuff that's been going on as of late, the old course history, even though it's not the same course at all, that will come across. I think he still picks up some steam. And then, like I said, maybe Thigala a little bit, but it feels like people won't play him because he's almost like another guy like Varner at 8,700 that just feels way overpriced for the numbers. So you can take a chance on that. He actually is okay for me. I like Thigala a little bit in here. I could be sold on Reed. So, Ron did a pretty good job there. I had a couple guys that I talked to that are trying to sell me on him and starting to come around to Reed. And we've got potential flop lag after last week. He crushed everybody at 7,800 at 20% ownership. He gets the boost now, and I don't think he'll be near 20% ownership. So I don't hate that. And then just dropping down, the one other guy that I'm willing to take a shot on here, I'll boost him skill set wise, is Rasmus Højgaard. And this guy's a DP World Tour guy. But if you take both tours across, 14 straight made cuts, 12 of them or something were on the DP World Tour, but some of those even stronger fields. But even if you want to say, okay, fine, what has he done on the PGA Tour? T18 and 6th in his last two outings, which aren't that far back. So it's a guy that actually has real talent with potential upside. You are taking a risk on a guy like him when you have a safety play of Brendan Todd or CT Pan right below. But again, in large field tournaments, I like that. So Rasmus there. The other guy I mentioned was Thigala. And then going back up, like I said, probably Reed if I had to pick one just based on sort of coming around to it. I don't love this range, but I think this is where you kind of got to be willing to take a shot because moving one 9K guy down to one of these 8K guys means getting off of one of those value plays at the bottom and popping up into the 7K range where I actually think we have a lot of decent options, at least compared to the 8K or 6K range below.
Ron, what about you for the high sevens? Because again, it is possible to get like Cam Smith, Shane Lowry, two of those individuals, but then you need to feel really confident in rostering like 3 players from this range. And that's something that when I initially started building, 1, I did not expect, first of all, but 2, like I struggled to do because in my opinion, it's hard to find someone in this range and they're priced here, so I shouldn't be shocked, but someone with like a complete game that like you have a lot of confidence in that fits St. George's perfectly. And so I'm just curious, like, where does it begin for you here in this lower tier?
Yeah, there's not much confidence as we get lower here. I will jump up a little bit to Brendan Todd at 8,200. Like I said in the intro, he's kind of a perfect fit here. That price still for me. I just kind of picture him in the 7K range, but 8,200. But again, he was 3rd at Colonial, kind of a somewhat similar course. 8th at Valero. I do a thing where I look at short courses. He's 13th of my short course model. As far as finding fairways, if we're talking about the importance of precision and accuracy, he's 2nd in fairways gained, 18th in good drives. Another thing that I've been looking more at lately is putting. And Brandon Gadula, he did a study here, and basically guys who are strong from the 5 to 15 foot range putting, that's kind of more sticky as far as long term. And so he's first in the field in putting from 5 to 15 feet. He's really good on bent grass. He's 14th on longer par 3s. And so, he's a guy who, I don't know what ownership will end up at, but, I think he's just a really good fit here. And then going down, Aaron Rye is somebody who, at 7,900 who, I don't think people realize, that he's won tournaments, over in Europe. He's a world-class player and he's had some pretty good success lately on tour. He's got 4 top 30s in his last 7 events. He's, especially in a weaker field like this, I think he presents some upside. And so I love him at 7,900. Cameron Champ is interesting to me from the driving distance angle, at 78 here. So, once you get past him though, Canadian Nick Taylor, I think, his approach game has been really sharp lately. And so at 7,700, he's another guy in that upper 7 range. But as we go further down here, you got, a guy like Smotherman. I've got him already at 11%. So, I really don't want to take any chances on guys who are sneaking into double digits here. So it's going to be kind of over the next day or so trying to figure out more here. And so I'd be really interested to see what Tyler has to say about this range.
Yeah, I can take it from there, John, if you like, because I think, a lot of the guys you mentioned, some of them, you might have sold me on Brendan Todd. I especially like the stat you mentioned with the 5 to 15 footer, because that obviously, as I know you're well aware, but for those watching me, wonder why is that a thing? It's when you get those smaller greens, it's very hard to have those longer putts. And again, goes back to my RBC Heritage conversation earlier, where that's what ends up happening there. You miss a lot of greens just by nature. And so you have those shorter chip shots where even if you're not the best around the green, you better be able to make those 5 to 10 footers, 5 to 15 footers, because that's what the week comes down to. And it's not always who's the best at it going in, but it's nice to hear Brendan Todd is. It's who does it the best for the week. But if he's done it over that sample, I definitely like to hear that. But dropping back down, you mentioned Rye, like literally won the Scottish Open. That's a huge tournament that guys like Rahm and those guys play in. So a world-class player at a $7,900 price tag. One of the things I like to do down in this range and why I probably feel just more comfortable with it going in, it's not that I'm comfortable about these guys that I'm picking. I feel comfortable with the reason I'm picking them. And what that means is I'm looking for guys with actual upside or potential. I think one of the most common misconceptions in all of PGA DFS is as long as I get that 6 of 6, I'm good. And then people wonder why they're going backwards on Saturday and Sunday or whatever ends up happening because one or two guys don't come through. It's not just that you need those 6 to continuously come through. That's the obvious factor. It's that you need guys that have actual upside. So 40th and 50th, while they made the cut for you, that's not going to cut it for what you require to get to the top. So with Rye, we just talked about his absolute skill set long-term and what he's capable of. I'll take a risk. Adam Long, a guy that missed 2 of his last 3 cuts, but has the game, I think, for this course. And if you go before those 2 missed cuts, 35th, but there's a 15th, a 12th, and another 35th. Like that's 4 out of 6 events that he's come 35th or better, with 2 of them being top 15s, almost pushing top 10s. That's going to come in handy. JJ Spawn, a winner on tour this season. I think he can easily come through at a course like this. Fratelli, 10 of his last 11 made cuts, so I feel safe about something like that, where he's got an 8th, a 16th, and a 35th thrown in there. I like that. And then after that, you are taking a few more shots once you get to sort of 7,500 and below. But we can go there next, John, I guess. I'll let you take over from there. But that's at least how I feel about some of these guys. And then should note, I like Pat Perez, but he withdrew just earlier today, so he's no longer in the field.
Pat Perez was the chalk I was going to eat in that range, knowing like we pretty much need someone, at least one person. He was the one I was most confident in, but then obviously the WD. So
he
no
did
more.
it, and haven't got there yet. But when we're dumpster diving, but Adam Schenk at I believe it was 6,800. He was another one that he was going to be like Pan, the not sneaky guy, but at the same time, he actually looked like a pretty good value this week.
Ron, I want to get there for you below 7,500 for dumpster diving. I think the segments intertwined this week, knowing that there really aren't that many strong values. But is there someone you'd be taking a chance on if you are trying to roster 4 9K players, for example?
Yeah, a couple European guys here. Danny Willett, again, miscut last week. Again, if conditions get tough, he kind of plays on this type of course, I think, at 7,400. Matt Wallace is really intriguing to me. He's been horrible lately, but going back, I think his last couple events, he's been on the DP World Tour. He's actually had a couple of decent finishes. And so, I think he's a guy, last year, he was, playing really well. And, like some other guys, like a Charlie Hoffman, he's just taken a nosedive lately. So, he's kind of intriguing in that range with some upside, kind of going with what Tyler said. David Lipsky at 7,300. He's got 3 top 25s in his last 7 events. And then Matthias Schwab, he's really, a guy who has played well on these shorter courses. He's got a pretty good all-around game. If you look at his events kind of going back over 4 months, he's got 3 top 8s. He finished 8th at Valero. He was 7th in Puerto Rico, 7th at Honda. So I think he's a guy who's still maybe not a lot of people know much about him, but I think he's a guy who I'm probably going to be really overweight on in this lower 7K range.
And what about you, Tyler? You already mentioned a couple that WD that you were high on. Who is left over that's still in the field that you can have confidence rostering?
Yeah, I really like the Schwab call. Like you said, 8th at Valero, 7th Puerto Rico, 7th at Honda. You know, a lot of made cuts. I like that. I like Lipsky. I didn't see if he got into his U.S. Open qualifier, but even if he didn't, I still think that would even be more of a reason to play him. But at the same time, if he does, I think anyone that got into their qualifier on Monday is playing with freedom here. So I kind of like that. I like Steven Jaeger, who you mentioned earlier, a couple really good finishes lately, a 6th and a 15th. Again, talking about guys that we can find that upside from. And then JT Poston was another guy that stood out. 3rd at the Heritage, talked about that a few times on this show. 9th at the Wells Fargo, and another 37th at the Memorial last week in an even stronger field than this. I know this one's very strong at the top, but not much more throughout. I think of a course that sets up well for him. It's sort of this type of setup. And then the other guy I wondered on if you had anything, but Doug Gim, Ron. I kind of like him at 7,000, but it feels, again, kind of like the CT Pan situation. Do you think Doug Gim will get popular by the end of the week? Because I've got some good stats on him here as well at just 7,000 even.
Yeah, he definitely fits here. And then I actually initially loved him. And then when I look and I see he's around, I don't know what you have him at, but I have him around 9-10% right now. And I have kind of a rule. If I'm getting in the low 7Ks, anyone who's near double digits, I'm just kind of an automatic pass on unless I'm really different in other parts of my lineup. So yeah, he's a guy, who's everybody knows he's really good on approach, really good with his irons, really precise. But I may end up coming back to him, if I'm trying to fit two guys in, I may have no other choice. He definitely has upside.
I don't love the ownership, like you said. And what I worried about is because I know Svensson at the start of the week seemed like nobody would play him, but it sounds like he's getting really popular as the week goes on. So, and I actually really don't like the Svensson play for a couple of reasons. Not just, I'm Canadian, so I should love the guy, but at the same time, he did not get into his U.S. Open qualifier. He actually had to stay over in Ohio an extra night to play a 5-for-1 playoff, then go to play for second alternate after he moved out of that. So who knows, like if he got to Canada late last night or if he gets there today, whatever it was, it's not really an ideal spot for him to come out. And it's just tough. You didn't get the seat. You got to wait and see what happens. You want to play for your country at your home open. We'll see. Maybe he comes out. Last week we had Brendan Steele at 6,600 get the job done, but that was my thoughts on Svensson. The last guy, either of you, John, I'll let you take it back, but just the Gotterup play at 6,300. So Christopher Gotterup, the Haskins Award winner, T7 at the Puerto Rico. He's getting mentioned by a lot of people here. Just came off a hot run at the NCAAs. So wondering your thoughts on that, even if he does pick up a little bit of steam.
Ron, do you have any thoughts on Gotterup? I do not personally, and also quickly on Doug Gim. I do think he's someone that gets steamed by Thursday morning. I'm thinking like 12 to 15%. Right now, I do have single digits, but the more I'm seeing him talked about more and more, which tells me that he'll likely be rostered in that range.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from Gotterup is mostly what other people, are saying about him. I haven't done a lot of research into him yet. At 6,300 with the potential I know that he has, as far as what I've heard, I think he's kind of a guy, if you're playing, 100 lineups, I think 5%, I think that's a good number on him. I don't know what his ownership will be, but, going back to Svensson, initially I thought this would be a very good fit for him. And I think the course is good for him. But his form just has not been good recently. His irons have not been hitting. He's been kind of negative the last 3-4 events. As we kind of get lower here, though, and I don't understand why. I guess I kind of do when I look at the numbers. But, Daigle, we've gone back with Vaughn Taylor a lot here over the past few months. He pops literally every single week. And, at 6,800, he does have a lot of fit here as far as he's really good off the tee, really accurate. And so, I don't know if this is a week for me to go back and trust him again. He had, when you look at his last few events, he's only missed 2 of his last, looks like 9 cuts. So he has been kind of steady. And in a weaker field, he's probably kind of one of my higher guys down here. And then Carlos Ortiz is really intriguing as well at 6,700. He's kind of in a tailspin, kind of in the Matt Wallace, Charlie Hoffman, really not playing well. But I think, this is kind of the range where you're going to have to take some chances. And, we all know Carlos Ortiz has some win equity. He's won. He's, even going back to last year, he's had some really high finishes on tour. And so he may be a guy here who, really not many people are looking at that I may take a chance on.
Vaughn Taylor has also been tremendous from the sand and around the green. That's why I keep going back to him, thinking, okay, maybe it is a good value since, as you mentioned, really that's what he does best is perform well around the green in proximity to the hole and drive accurately, not far, but accurately. And so that's kind of what we're looking for this course. Before we get out of here, though, one last segment, I want to ask you, and it sounds like the conversation we're having, we're all not sure yet how to play this type pricing. And so I just want to get, Tyler, I want to start with you. What do you think is like the narrative you'll be fading the most this week? Like, what will you be saying? Okay, the field is doing that, but I think that approach is incorrect. So instead, I'm going to do this. Whether it be like, for instance, players who are priced cheap, their salaries then go up, and like a Harry Bonner, like an Adam Hadwin, but then saying, okay, well, if you're not going to play them, they actually are still very good fits for this course. I will play them instead. Something like that.
I would guess I would have two just to answer it so I could, kind of get a thought on it. But
Sure.
one would be, I'm definitely going to play those guys up top that you mentioned. I just think they'll be under-owned, even though Scotty Scheffler might be 16% by the end of the week. I think that's too low. And I think even though it requires you to make some moves, the second part of it is that I'm willing to go into that 8K range that's uncomfortable with like a Rasmus Højgaard or these guys where people won't go, or play them with a Varner who people don't like at the overpriced. So I'll definitely pay up for some stars and scrubs. I'll also, the second part I was going to say, just to tie it together, would be what I call paying up for probability, meaning I'm overpaying for guys, but knowing that I'm getting lower ownership based on that and willing to take my chances that way. I also am very comfortable with, like I said, like sort of taking my stands down low and mixing it more up top. A lot of cases people say you got to take stands up top. I think you have to take stands and get leverage. That's important in PGA DFS. But what most people like to do is take their stands at the top, plant their flag, and then mix in 5% of all these quote unquote scrubs to see what they get. I don't think there's a lot of good value plays down here this week. So I'm going to take my stands on the value plays and let the top do itself, because there's so many guys up there that we made cases for sort of 9K and up, that it's kind of anyone's game, on top of the narrative that next week is a major. So who really, I don't think Scotty, JT, or Rory are the type to mail it in. I think they come out and try right out of the gate, but I don't think you can put it past them that if it's not going well halfway through round two, that it's not that they pack it in. It's just, what's the point in grinding out the finish when you can just move on? So not saying that'll happen. I'm playing a bunch of them up there, especially Scotty and JT, but I think that's a way to get unique with your builds this week. Get different and be willing to pay up. And
like when you say leverage, when I say leverage, what I talk about is like a couple weeks ago at the Charles Schwab, whenever Scheffler came in, like in the mid to high stakes single entries, he was 13% compared to Jordan Spieth, who was 32%. Like that's the kind of leverage I want. And I'll just take my chances, even if Spieth is a better fit, that's fine. Let me roll Scotty Scheffler 20% less rostered than what he should be. And I kind of see that maybe it changes. I'm having a tough time gauging it right now, but I'm kind of seeing that happen between like Scheffler and Shane Lowry this week, where Shane Lowry is 28-30%. Given that his salary is still low considering how he fits here, and then Scheffler's overlooked because it's a tight fit at 11-1. Ron, though, what are your thoughts? What do you think is the narrative that you'll be debunking and fading this week compared to the field?
So first of all, I love what Tyler just said there, and that got me looking. So I like to kind of get a 3-core lineup as far as, who I'm going to build a lot around. And if we take that approach Tyler said, I can see myself going with a Schwab at 73, Rye at 79, Højgaard at 83. You build a core around those three guys, and then you kind of, like Tyler said, you mix and match up top, even dabbling down into that upper 8K range, where you have Reed and Rose. I really like that. As far as for overall, just, I'm kind of just going for upside here. Who has win equity? So a guy like, obviously, Justin Rose, at 8,800. A guy like Cameron Champ, 7,800. I'm kind of looking for, Matt Wallace at 7,400. Just high upside guys who, may not be popular, probably won't be popular, but who do have the potential to, if they spike, if they have a great week putting, for example, Cameron Champ, if he can dial in his irons, that's kind of the route I'm going this week, is almost like a boomer bust approach here.
Love it, gentlemen. Again, Tyler, thanks for joining the show, and tell the people where they can find everything you're working on currently.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys for having me on. It's a lot of fun just chopping it up, going through each range like this. A little bit different than everyone always goes through the ranges, but fun to talk about it from sort of a roster construction, game theory perspective. So
we know as DFS players that like picks don't, like, they're a piece of the puzzle, but when you talk about picks, like, it just doesn't matter for DFS anymore. Everyone's too sharp. So
yeah, I always say that it's not who you play. I always say it's not who you play, it's how you play them, and that's exactly what we just did and went through it. So I think that is key. You guys can find me on Twitter at @ToeTagAndTambo. I think the handle is up there. Put out a lot of free stuff each week. I do a little thread every Wednesday morning where I take all the free stuff from around the industry that I find just to try and put it out there. Helps me, and I know it helps others that don't have as much time to dig into it all throughout the week. It helps me when I put it together. And then, of course, runpuresports.com. You guys get over to runpuresports.com, use promo code DGEN50 and get yourself 50% off your first month. Thanks again, guys.
That thread is called Tambo's Tidbits, and I am a big fan of it as well. Ron, what else do you have coming out for everyone this week?
Yeah, Betsperts We really excited about the new custom search model that we're putting together here that should be out soon, and everybody will be able to go ahead and try that. And just same as always, betting article coming out. First round leader model. We've had some pretty good success recently, even though we've had to chop it up a bunch of times with all these first round ties. So hopefully keep that going. And great to be here, Tyler. Appreciate you coming on.
We're going to get one. We're going to get one soon, Ron. To have multiple tickets, I shouldn't be complaining because I have had multiple tickets via the first round model the past 2 weeks, but to chop it up 8 and 6 ways, heartbreaking, heart-wrenching.
There's a solo one coming soon, boys.
I would think so for all of us. But until then, good luck this week, and we will be back with a major next week. See you then.